back on the 0 Hour. I'm your host, Richard RJ Eskow. If you don't know my friend Mike Alk and his writing about labor, you really should, and you really need to, because Mike is, for my money, maybe the best labor reporter in the country right now. He's doing a lot of great work. He publishes at PaydayReport.com, which you ought to support right now. Well, no, you should listen to this conversation first and then support it. Mike is a protege of my late and good friend William Greider, Bill Greider, one of the best ever, maybe the best ever in my book. He's a proud Yinzer. That, if you don't know what that means, go to Pittsburgh and they'll tell you. He's been covering union organizing for years, and he has the distinct honor of having been called an abrasive gadfly by the New York Times, which is something we should all aspire to be. So, Mike Alk, good to see you, my friend, and thanks for coming on the program.
Oh, Richard, it's great to be on. We were thinking of Bill yesterday. We're down here in Huntington, West Virginia. It's a town of about, 50,000 here. Actually more, because it's spread out, but it's right along the Ohio River. It's spread out along Kentucky, West Virginia. The metropolitan area is about 300,000. It's the largest city in West Virginia. It's the seat, where Marshall University is. It was a huge manufacturing city, and it's right along the Ohio River. And to put this into context of where we are, thinking of Bill, he grew up along the Ohio River like I did, there in Cincinnati, is that, if you think about the development of the Ohio River was the first major highway of America. Because before there were trains, before there were cars, and so it became a big industrial hub. It became, a place that immigrants moved to because of the transportation, because of the factories there, because of the jobs there. And so, to put into context, this is a city here that's about 20% Black. That's pretty ethnic. I say that as a Yinzer from Pittsburgh, as an Italian Jew. Pretty, not what I think a lot of people think of necessarily about West Virginia, but think of in terms of the Ohio River Valley. And Bill spent so much of his career in Louisville as a labor reporter and elsewhere. And, what we're seeing here is sort of a revival of that history. And if you think about, the one thing I always like about Bill that he said, and I'm sure you heard him said this, is he used to get in these fights with Lawrence Goodwin, who was a great populist author, right? Not fights, they were best of friends, but Goodwin was a Southerner. And Greider says it's actually in a great speech. He tells this story in a great speech. It's actually, you can find it on YouTube, because Bill Greider got called out to a DSA event in Chicago long before they were popular to give a speech and accept an award. And it's a really great speech. Everyone should check it out. But he talks about this fight that he'd had with Lawrence Goodwin, that Lawrence Goodwin would say, and he would say, Lawrence Goodwin was from the tragic South, and he had this view of America being a bad thing. And Bill says the tragic South, and he's talking about his friend, and he says, Lawrence Goodwin shot back, Bill, the real radicals are from the Midwest, because you guys actually believe that shit about America.
Right. That's true.
That was Bill.
And that was Bill. Bill believed that about America all the way through. And he was on the show. He
was 9 years old when World War II ended. He was actually in Pittsburgh. His grandmother lived in Pittsburgh, and he told me stories of watching the victory parades. And that generation, the Bill Greiders, the Ed Asners, the Fritz Mondales, they were progressives, they were populists, because they believed in this country. They really believed that stuff. And as someone who grew up, my grandfather's a World War II veteran, I certainly feel that way about this country. And when people get super cynical, of course, this is a place that has terrible tragedies, and trauma, and exploitation, this country. But at the same time, believe in it.
Yeah, and believing it's such an important thing, Mike, because you got to keep the faith, man. You have to. And to me, it's always, I sometimes think about this. In religion, they had Pascal's wager. If you know Pascal's wager, Pascal said, logically, I don't think God exists, but to be on the safe side, I'm going to act as if he does. And that way, just on the off chance he does, I'll get into heaven. Now, I'm not sure that's good theology, but that's the way I feel about organizing and fighting for the futures. I'm not sure we'll win, but I'm going to act like we're going to win, and I'm going to fight like we're going to win. And I think everybody needs to. You and Bill were from the Ohio River. I was from Utica, New York, along the old Erie Canal. Utica, New York, that used to be called the Gateway to the West, believe it or not, because and Erie Canal, which was now Erie Street. But, we've done working people have done amazing things in this country and will again, no matter how hard they try to lock us in concrete block buildings and trap us in the metaverse. No. We're going to get stuff done again. And to me, that's one of the big things that you do at the Payday Report is, people are talking now about Striketober, which is great, that we had so many strikes.
Kind of a misnomer.
Yeah, I figured you'd say that, but you've been tracking strikes at Payday Report, and your strike tracker has gotten tons of attention from a lot of, heavy hitting people. You've been tracking strikes for a long time, and it wasn't just some passing October. I mean, when I read your stuff, I think there's something going on here on a deep level, but you tell me what you think.
Well, think about this. We actually have a collaboration coming out with the Washington Post, I think early next week, where the Washington Post reporters was randomly Googling strikes, and they found the strike tracker. And they found that there was a small pattern. Speaking of Utica, you know where Bradford, Pennsylvania is?
I do. And I grew up on Bradford Avenue in Utica, by the way. So, yeah. But yes, I do. Yeah.
So there were these workers at the McDonald's there, downtown Bradford, which is a small little state college town, about 8,000 people. It's where the Zippo factory is. It was Union Factory. Proud historyans have up there in Western New York of that kind of tradition and those kind of towns. You know the kind of town I'm talking about.
Absolutely. I grew up in one when it was still a union town and still a manufacturing town. Yeah.
And so what happened is the workers at the downtown McDonald's were making $9.50 an hour. And Bradford's only 10 minutes from the New York state line. On the other side of the New York state line, fast food minimum wage is $15 an hour.
Uh-huh.
So if you were a fast food worker, why would you want to work in downtown Bradford? Unless you didn't own a car.
Right.
So the franchise owner at this McDonald's figured out that it's best to recruit folks that are intellectually disabled.
Huh. Okay.
Because they can't drive. They're not going to leave, they'll work there. So he's paying them $9.50 an hour, and there were some other folks working there. There was a woman who was epileptic. There was a shift manager, and they organized a walkout.
Uh-huh.
And they got a community petition. They got 100 customers to sign it. And they circulated it, and they gave it to management, and they walked out, and they all got better jobs.
Oh, that's amazing.
Weeks. Yeah. We saw in August 900,000 retail workers quit their jobs, right? And so they walked out, they got these jobs, and then what happened is, I don't know how to say the name pronounced, Olean, New York, right up the road.
How's it spelled?
Olean. You know what I'm talking about? Olean's?
I never heard of it. Olean, maybe?
Olean. Sorry, yeah. Olean.
Yeah.
So these Walmart hairstylists in Olean had read about a local news article about the strike at the McDonald's. And in Bradford, this became the biggest talk of the town for a while on the local Facebook groups. Read about a strike at the McDonald's, and they all decided to walk out.
Uh-huh.
And so, we have a strike tracker, and Cornell has a strike tracker, and the Cornell strike tracker's numbers are half ours because they don't count the retail worker walkouts.
Uh-huh.
Because they're not real strikes in the academic sense. It's not
because they're not organized by a union. You mean? Is that why they don't quote unquote count?
Yeah. And what I would argue, right? Everybody's paying and I've talked with Ben Dixon about this. Everybody's paying so much attention to John Deere, where there's 10,000 workers on strike. 900,000 retail workers left their job in August. This is an industry that's particularly heavily black, right?
Mm-hmm.
Left their job in August, and not only left their job, but they left their jobs, and W.B. Du Bois says in one of his books that the biggest strike in American history was enslaved African Americans walking off the plantation.
Uh-huh.
And in many ways, we're seeing a parallel to that today. And the fact that the labor movement doesn't quite entirely see that, I think it gets to some questions because, like, you know, if these workers at this McDonald's in downtown Bradford had said, oh, you know what we're going to do? We're going to call a union. We're going to try to find a union that wants to come out here to organize 8 people in a high turnover industry. No union's going to do that, right? And so instead, and then we're going to spend months going through an NLRB process, and we're going to get lawyers, and we're going to, like, who wants to stick around for that, right? That sounds like
that's not how this started, Mike, right? I mean, you know, with the labor situation being as rough as it's been, with the corporate forces having beat back organizing rights so much, for years now, I've been going back to the 19th century, right? I've been going back to, like, when we didn't have any kind, when it was built from scratch, and 18th century even a little bit, but, you know, and it's exactly what you said. It wasn't like a legalized process. It was, you know, we're not taking this anymore. You know, we're done. We're not doing this anymore. My grandfather was a union organizer in the 30s. You know, I mean, no, we're done with you right now. And so you make a great point, which is that, I mean, like, as you were talking, I was picturing, like, concentric circles, right? And in the middle is, like, the official sanctioned strike. And then around it are all the walkouts, like you've been tracking on the strike tracker. And then around that, as you point out, it's like the millions of people who've just said, you know, I'm done with this job. That I'm not for the danger under COVID, for the lousy working conditions, for the lousy pay. I'm gone. And that
on top of how many people realized during the pandemic how much money they were spending on childcare.
Right. Absolutely.
I mean, we saw something like 3 million parents leave the workforce because it was like, oh, you know, I might make 10,000 more, but I'm going to be treated like crap and not get to spend time with my kids. And, you know,
another great point, because, you know, that counts too, because since we don't have childcare subsidies in this country, then what you wind up with is you have people working for minimum wages. Nobody can live on it anyway, but you have people working for much less than minimum wage when they get done, you know, working for pennies an hour when they get done paying for their child care. Then if you're a single parent and you work at a fast food restaurant, they won't even tell you what your shift is day after next. You can't, you know, trying to arrange childcare. You're right. I mean, you've really kind of broadened my consciousness a little bit, Mike, out here.
Think about this. I just got done reading Fritz Mondale's autobiography, which everyone should read. A real hero, in my opinion, civil rights hero. And I didn't quite appreciate it till I was, when he died, I went back and I Googled Bill's 1984 Rolling Stone column on it.
Bill Ryder, yeah.
And Bill's just like, I remember right before the 1980 election, I thought he was the stiff guy. I remember he sat down and he said, do you think you're going to win? And he said, no. and you know, Mondale was a civil rights fighter. You know, he passed the Fair Housing Act, but he also led the fight against Mike Mansfield, against the Democratic Party, below the threshold on the filibuster. And he was the chairman in the 1970s of the Equal Opportunity Committee. And in the early 1970s, he recalled showing up for a Sabbath dinner with a rabbi in Minneapolis and being shocked because he got the news that Nixon had vetoed his universal child care bill. And what Nixon came out and said, and he talks about in his autobiography, that he really felt it was the beginning of the welfare cultural war. Because what Nixon says is, why should we be subsidizing these mothers not to stay at home when they should be raising their families? And if we subsidize childcare, it will encourage single mothers, blah, blah, blah. And this was in the early 1970s. I think this was 73 or 74. You have to look it up. But, you know, that is a debate we have to get back to. And the thing I wanted to circle back to, what's really funny is, you know, I'm with John Russell, who's from Bridgeport, Ohio, which is right across from Wheeling. Good guy. You know, he works, he's starting a publication. We're working together out here. And we got into town. We drove down from Pittsburgh through the mountains. Gorgeous drive this time of year with all the fall weather. And we get down here and we show up to the picket line. And I show up and I'm like, we're in West Virginia. I'm like, oh my God, the workers are holding signs saying Build Back Better.
Really?
Yeah, that were printed by the union, these fancy signs that said Build Back Better. And I was like, oh my God, maybe this is a strike against Manchin. So I went up to the union rep and I asked her, it was SEIU, local SEIU 1199, WKHO, because it's the Tri-Cities here between Kentucky, Ohio, West Virginia. I asked her, I said, well, what are these signs all about? Like, is this like, I don't want to put words in workers' mouth. They're like the workers on the picket line demanding the reconciliation bill passed. And she said, no. These folks aren't that tuned into local politics. What happened is we printed a bunch of signs for a rally. We had a bunch around the Union Hall, and workers saw the signs and they were like, oh, Build Back Better. Yeah. We went through this collective trauma of, working in a hospital during the pandemic. They're at a hospital, which is one of the biggest in Huntington. They do a lot of stuff with Marshall University here. They got $40 million in CARE Act. While other hospitals use the CARE Act to give bonuses and raises to workers, they didn't get anything. In fact, it's such a union-busting hospital that not just are they asking for cuts in healthcare and wages, they're asking for cuts in paid holidays.
So wow.
I mean, this is like, asking for people to give up holidays, and that's just wow. And so it was wow to be out on a picket line and see this slogan that was developed. But I started thinking about it, and I was like, Build Back Better. Even though we made fun of Biden for that being cheesy, our country suffered a real trauma. And at the beginning of the pandemic, as a student of the Civil War, as somebody who studied World War II and has been fascinated by both, there was a sense after those events that we got through this as Americans, and we're going to change this country now.
Well, let's hope that's true. It's funny that you're thinking that Fritz Mondale's on your mind right now, Mike, because, Mondale was the descendant of this long, proud populist tradition in the Midwest. His party was not the Democratic Party. It was, as you know, a Democratic.
Well, you know about his father, right?
Democratic Farmer Labor Party of Minnesota, part of that great tradition. I don't know about Mondale's father, no.
So Mondale's father was a dirt poor Presbyterian minister who traveled around southern Minnesota during the Depression, which is how Mondale grew up. Mondale talks about his first political experiences being campaigning for Henry Wallace. And John Nichols wrote a great book on Henry Wallace, which everyone needs to go out and read.
To talk about it, yeah.
Have you read it?
Yeah. John came on the show to discuss it.
He's, talk about somebody who's the best in the ball game. I mean, it doesn't get better than Nichols. I like to joke that John Nichols is the Tony Bennett of labor reporters.
Well, I'm not sure he's flattered since Tony Bennett is like 98, but
he's still going. He's still going, though.
Yeah.
Talk about a World War II veteran who was a civil rights fighter.
True, yeah.
People forget that one of the draws of the Selma March was that each night Harry Belafonte and Tony Bennett were doing roadside free concerts.
I'd check that out.
A lot of black folks came out, but also, moderate white folks were like, man, Tony Bennett, Harry Belafonte, Yeah, I'm going to go down there and check it out and see what's going on. That sounds like a pretty good time,
Yeah, no, God bless those. God bless those guys. Yeah, going out there and risking their lives.
Battle of the Bulge veteran,
Yeah. Who's that?
Tony Bennett was a Battle of the Bulge veteran.
I did not know that.
And then after he got done fighting the Battle of the Bulge, after the war, he was in this, choir that toured playing USO shows. And he's in Mannheim, Germany, and he grew up in, Italian immigrant son in Brooklyn. He runs into a guy on the street in Mannheim, Jersey, a black guy he'd gone to school with in Brooklyn. He's like, hey, man, how's it going? And he's like, hey, I'm staying in this fancy hotel, but I got a free +1 to dinner every night. So Tony Bennett brings his black high school buddy to dinner. He gets kicked out of the unit.
Oh, really? Yeah.
And that's what made Tony a hardcore civil rights fighter, to be like, I had just risked my life as a replacement soldier in the Battle of the Bulge with little training, and I get kicked out of a unit. And finally, there was a Jewish major who heard about this and got him into a different unit. But, for Tony Bennett to go through that experience, for him, and I think, get back to this concept of Build Back Together, because the story I'm coming out with is 1,000, just to see all these workers, black and white, on the picket lines with Build Back Better signs. I was like, wow, this is surreal. But they thought it was a really catchy slogan. I mean, we're building back from a collective trauma.
Yeah, no, that's a great point, Mike, and Mike Alec with Payday Report. But the other, you mentioned that there's black and white workers together. The labor movement in this country has been one of the crucibles of black and white and brown and people of all races and backgrounds getting to know one another, whether it was in the Civilian Conservation Corps, whether it was organizing in the United Mine Workers in the 19th and early 20th centuries. The ideals that certainly the Democratic Party claims to aspire to, it all was strengthened or arises from the union movement. So it seems to me, the beat you cover, which is union organizing, that is, it's the strength of our past and it's the strength of our future.
Yeah, and I think I sent out a note the other day because during the pandemic I was immunocompromised. I didn't travel at all to cover any pickets, and unfortunately I was kind of bummed. We raised a bunch of money to go out and cover the IATSE strike. Then IATSE sold out their members, but there was just a survey done by a reform group saying it's unlikely to pass. So I was kind of bummed about all of this. And, I was bummed about the election losses the other night. Phil Murphy barely hung on.
I know.
McAuliffe deserved to lose, to be honest. It sucks for Virginia. It really sucks. But come on, it's Terry McAuliffe. Of course, it's, But, you look at Phil Murphy, who John Nichols labeled the most progressive governor in America. I mean, this is a good guy, who raised, passed paid, family leave, who passed paid sick days, who passed $15 an hour, who started unemployment for undocumented immigrants there during the pandemic. Well, this is a good guy.
Yeah, he is a good guy. Yeah.
And to see him barely hang on, that shook me up. I thought when I went to bed, I thought he was going to lose, which was scary. And then I was lying in bed and I was just sorting through some stuff in my head, and I was so excited to come down and cover a strike, because I always say to folks, because folks are always like, oh, aren't you so bummed about what's happening in national politics? I'm like, workers are on the march all over this country.
Absolutely, yeah. And that's the message. Yeah.
I mean, look at the teacher strikes a few years ago. We were out on the picket line. I was there the first morning of the teacher strikes in Wheeling, West Virginia. And I was out here talking to some workers in Huntington. And they were saying the same thing, that, teachers get so much crap when they went on strike, and then they saw how much community support they got. And the company, the hospital is trying really bad to paint them bad in the press. But what's kind of interesting is the Democratic House leader of West Virginia actually just bought the local newspaper here.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And the local newspaper has been doing good coverage. I mean, the local TV stations, not so much. But they thought they'd get a lot of grief of, you saw these quotes in some of the local TV stations of, I was going to have gallbladder surgery and now it's canceled because these guys went on strike, and they were looking at the West Virginia teacher strikes and they're like, the teachers thought the same thing. And then they saw how much energy they had. I mean, I was out there on the picket line last night, and, we have some videos coming out. The number of car horns. I mean, there's nothing.
Oh, really? Oh, really? Yeah. And you mean as people drive by, they're honking, right? Yeah.
Yeah. On the first day of a strike, it's like a party. People are hanging out, they're grilling, they're talking, they got the day off. And Bill once described it to me as it becomes like a school of popular education.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
People are off work, and what are they doing? They're hanging out, they're getting to know one another. And there've been so many times I've covered strikes and lockouts that people are like, oh, I didn't even know this person on the other side of the plant. And then we became best of friends.
Yeah.
My father just retired after 33 years in the UE. And my father just retired. And it was really interesting when he retired, because there was a retirement story written in the UE News. And they were describing a strike at WABCO in the early 80s when they had to set up, a 24-hour-a-day kitchen at the Union Hall to feed 4,000 people. Not all the time, but that anybody could come down any day and night. And it kind of became a big hangout spot. And they were describing this in my father's retirement story. And, I wasn't, it was a couple of years before I was born that this occurred. There was, I think, 83 at WAPTEC when they had a strike. They were describing that. And, when you're out on a picket line, I mean, God, I was so bummed because we raised a bunch of money to go out and cover IATSE. It didn't happen. It's just like, oh, man, we're going to lose money. We're going to lose freelance stories. Oh, it might happen again. And then to get out here on a picket line and see this kind of energy. Not just are there 1,000 hospital workers on strike at Campbell Huntington Hospital here. There's 500 steel workers on strike as well at the biggest factory in town, Special Metals. And this is a town of 50,000. The metro area is a little bit bigger. I think it's 300,000 spread out among 7 counties here. And, it's fascinating because they were on strike, but there was also a group of 50 machinists who pulled a surprise strike on the company for 2 weeks and they won. So you have a labor movement here where folks in the labor movement are like, yeah, like this is a big union town, like they got pride in this place. And I hate the national media when they talk about this places or, because first up, I mean, this is Appalachia here, but it's also the Ohio River Valley. It's not like we're out in some coal field somewhere, and, this is going to be fascinating. And I think it's going to get a lot of national attention because something's happening here. Like when you have a hospital and it's on the main boulevard right by the university. I mean, we were out there for an hour. I mean, it was too cold. I had to go back and it was like 5. I just bought a light jacket and I was like, oh, Jesus. And, to be on that main thoroughfare and to hear that many horns and to be interviewing people and then have to stop the conversation and be like, oh my God, wait, stop the audio. This shit's going on, blah, blah, blah. It's just really, wow.
No,
because there's just so many horns blaring, and it's it's a magnetic electric, not magnetic. Well, magnetic in the sense that people are attracted to it,
right?
An electric environment,
Well, this is where like the internet can't replace human contact and human solidarity. And to me, solidarity is the operative word here. And this is where the whole like blue red state cliche breaks down, right? Because West Virginia is a red state, quote unquote, but the red state teachers' strikes had enormous support from the community. Now you're talking about community of Huntington, West Virginia, where,
Speaking of the red state divide, we were out on the picket line yesterday. We saw a guy, he had a Let's Go Brandon hat on. He was waving a picket sign.
Well, that's resounding.
And my colleague John Russell, who I'm working with, he talked to a couple of Trumpies, doing this, and that's what I try to bring up. Right now, the teachers in Scranton are in strike. Joe Biden's hometown.
Right. Where's Joe? Right.
And where's Joe?
Yeah.
I talked to some teachers there. This is his hometown. And, there was just a poll put out, Data for Progress, and HuffPo, Dave Jameson, great labor reporter, wrote it up, that showed the majority, overwhelming majorities in both parties support the strike wave.
Awesome. See that?
And then that was my hot take about the election losses is, Joe should just go walk a picket line in Scranton. It's his hometown.
Absolutely.
Who's going to beat him up for that,
And if Terry McAuliffe had walked a few picket lines, it might have helped him too. I think it would have. Yeah. Not that it's in his nature necessarily, but you know what I'm saying.
Well, actually, to be in all fairness, I once did walk a picket line with Terry McAuliffe at a hotel in Alexandria. And
How'd that go?
Say I was out walking. I mean, picket line. It was nice. He gave some nice words. This was when he was first running for governor. There was some a Unite Here had a protest. Actually, I think in like Crystal City, somewhere like that in Northern Virginia, and I was out there. But Biden. I was talking with Faz Shakir, Bernie.
Yeah, sure. Faz Shakir worked on the Bernie campaign. Yeah, ran it. Yeah, sure.
And he was saying, "Yeah, I can't think of anything smarter for Joe to do."
Yeah, I can't either.
And even with Scranton, like the fact that the national media isn't picking up on the fact that there's, I think I want to say Scranton must be like the 4th biggest school district in PA. Scranton, right? Like the national media, the coastal media. And no offense, Richard, I know you live.
I can't help where I live.
No, but the coastal media gets so lazy. It's like, oh, we can just all hang out at book parties in Brooklyn together.
Right, I know.
DC folks are less lazy, in my opinion, from having worked in both cities as a journalist. And I'm just like, Scranton's like 2 hours from New York. You would suspect that, Vice or one of those kind of outlets would be like, go down there with a camera and, talk to
Yeah, it's a hell of a story. Yeah. And, Mike, I got to say that I had the opposite reaction. I'm immunocompromised. Also, I couldn't go out there in COVID, but listening to you talk, man, I just feel like I want to be out there reporting again. I want to see some action because I haven't seen it. Once in a while during COVID, I'd say that my wife would go, "Oh my God, no, don't! You have people who love you and all that." But now I think it's pretty safe, and you've got me feeling like I want to get out there, man. I want to get out there where the action is because
Are you in DC now?
Yeah,
you should come up to Huntington and check it out. I mean, these strikes are going to go on for a while because
maybe I will.
What's really screwed up, and I've seen this, is you have these big anti-union employers, and when they're preparing for a contract negotiation, you have these companies, they're like scab companies, they're called contingency companies. Come to an employer and say, they might strike, so you're going to want to have us under contract to keep things running. So they went around.
I didn't know that existed, yeah.
No, actually, this is a funny story. I was at In These Times, it was quite funny. And Chris Townsend, longtime UE political action director, sent me a copy of a brochure he got from a conference that these guys held in Arizona.
Ooh,
and
I'd
the
want
headliner,
to cover that, yeah.
Guess who the headliner was on top of the brochure?
It sure as hell wasn't Tony Bennett. Who was it?
The Fonz.
The Fonz, really? This is as fresh off his hit turn at Trump's convention in 2016. Didn't the Fonz show up at Trump's? Oh, no, it was somebody else. It was...
No, and he was actually on the board of SAG-AFTRA for a while. I guess apparently what
Henry
occurred
Winkler?
is...
Are you talking about...
Henry
he's
Winkler.
not... I thought he's supposed to be a big Democratic liberal and everything.
Well, it was a weird thing that occurred. He got told he was going to a convention of HR guys to give a speech about overcoming stuttering.
Wow.
And it turned out to be a union buster convention. And so Fonz actually chewed me out. He's like, this entire story is a lie. I never spoke to a union buster convention because, they flew him into Tempe. They brought him out, he gave a quick speech, room full guy with suits. And so that was my headline. And he spent days yelling at me and then he apologized. And I told this story to Bowser. Because, people always say to Bowser, like, oh, aren't you like Fonz? And he's like, I predated Fonz. Fonz is like me.
John B. Bauman of Sean and I, he takes great pride in that stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, I was out even when Connor Lamb was running a special election. I was in a car with Bowser, and we were getting up the turnpike. And the turnpike attendant says, you really look like that guy, Fonz.
Oh, that would offend him.
And he's like, oh, I look much more like that guy, John Bowser.
I tell you, go out to dinner with Bowser sometime. People over 50, they flock to get his autograph. People under 50 have no idea who he is.
But I've been out because he's out with Connor Lamb, and there were some logistics schedules, and Alex Lawson, our friend, founder, what is he, executive director of Social Security Works or president?
Yes, he's executive director. I think. Yeah.
Said, could you hang out with Fonz? So I ended up, not Fonz, with Bowser. I ended up hanging out with Bowser for a week. And what would be great is sometimes he'd meet young folks and they'd be like, who are you? Why are these people coming up to you? And he would be like, hey, there's going to be a meeting tonight. You going to come to the meeting?
Yeah.
I just love that. He loves when people come up to him and he's like, oh, yeah, we're going to play a show tonight for this free show. You're going to come out, we're going to do some organizing. And, talk about someone who really believes in this country. Certainly John Bowser does.
Yeah, he's a good friend. And, well, Mike, we've covered just about everything under the sun except one thing that I really want to cover before I let you go, which is where people can find Payday Report, where people can contribute to it, where people can read your reporting, see the strike tracker, all that stuff. So I know the answer, but you tell us.
People can go to paydayreport.com/donate. Send us some money. They can put it in the mail. We got a mailbox. I know we got a lot of senior citizens that don't like to screw around with Venmo or PayPal. My email address is melk@paydayreport.com. And We'd love support. We're reader funded. We don't really get any big grants. We get 85% of our money comes from readers. We bring in about 100,000 a year, and we're able to cover this stuff. But this strike that we're covering here in Huntington, this is going to be a big national story.
Well,
and I think you're going to see a lot more attention coming days on it.
Keep pushing it, Mike. Keep doing that great reporting. As always, keep up the great work. And as always, thanks for coming on the program, man. It's great to talk to you.
All right. Thanks. Bye.
We'll be right back after this. I'm Richard RJ Eskow, and this is The Zero Hour.